Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 29 in my 50 most relevant for 2025 in AFL Fantasy Dream Team and SuperCoach. It's one of my favourite players. Look, he is a Josh. It's not Josh Kelly, but it's Josh Dunkley is who we're talking about this episode of the 50 most relevant. For years, he's been at the top of the tree. He's been a premium mid. He's been a premium forward. And in 2025, if you want your hands on him, at least to start, you're going to drop some decent coin on his head to get there. Joining me on this episode as he has right throughout, not only a number of years now as a coaches panel through the keeper ranks that we do, pretty much it does feel like every time we talk about Josh Dunkley, we do have to have Kane on. Hello, mate. He's one of your favourites too.
He is, MJ. He is probably my equivalent to your Josh Kelly. Let's be honest. I feel like every year I've been on the coaches panel, I've spoken about him. I've had the pleasure. I've had it written into my contract that I get to talk about Josh Dunkley. And to be fair, he's rewarded me, but he's still a guy, MJ, that slides under the radar, it feels like, unless he's got that forward status. So keen to see what you think going into 2025.
If we look at his season in totality overall, and we will work through some positional things in a moment, but if we look over what he's been for a big chunk of his career, he's been a highly relevant and valuable player for us. If you want your hands on him, it's going to set you back some decent cash in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. Over $1 million in those two formats. That's because he's coming in off a seasonal average of 107.4. While in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, it's on the higher end. It's no cheaper in SuperCoach because he's coming in at an average over 110. Yeah, rare territory air that premiums can be this good across the formats. He's one of them. He's going to set you back over 600,000 in SuperCoach. A top score last year in SuperCoach of 163 against the Gold Coast Suns. While it's honestly nowhere near a career high score for him. He's a part of the 200 club in SuperCoach. He has delivered for us a 202. While in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, you're setting himself up with a 158 as his season high score against Melbourne. That's a team he seems to score all right against because just the 5 years earlier, that's also where his career high score was. In that game that he dished up the 200 in SuperCoach, he got so close in AFL Fantasy to hitting Nick Riewoldt territory numbers. He gave us a 189. Okay, long-term listeners and followers of the Coaches Panel will know both of our love of Josh Dunkley as a player. He still finds a way to be underrated in the fantasy football community and probably to a bigger extent in the AFL landscape in general. He's just this incredible talent. Not only has he got the ability to win clearance, not only has he got the ability to be a damaging option when he does drift forward and a really strong and compelling overhead mark. He's got beautifully clean hands, but he's not just this offensive-minded mid. He's then got this ability to sacrifice himself and his game at times to protect his teammate if they're getting a tag in a Lachie Neale and previously a Marcus Bontempelli. He's then got just such strong offensive presence that he's one of the best tacklers in the game. And it never really, any junction of the year, do you go, he's only going to sacrifice one component of his game for the other. He's one of the best two-way workers and runners in the game. He does everything really well. But from a fantasy football perspective, we love, because even when it feels like he's out of the game in one dynamic, he could have just points in a second, third, or fourth. He's such a great player to own and to watch.
100% MJ. And I think obviously the infatuation the community had with him dates back to that 2019 season where he started a bit sluggish, but then for the back 17 games of the year, he averaged over 120 in AFL Fantasy and nudging towards 130 in SuperCoach. So I think maybe that's where there's been a little bit of a smell about him, because we just felt like this could be the next Tom Mitchell, Ablett, Swan type of guy that just had the ability to do everything, as you flagged, rack up big numbers, tackles, marks, goals. But we saw in those final 3 years with the Bulldogs, what really jumped out, wasn't it, was he never had more than 50% centre bounces in those 3 years. 50% was his highest in 2022. And yet he still delivered a near on 110 in AFL Fantasy. So I think when we got to Brisbane, what excited us the most was, what does this guy do with 80% centre bounces? We were proven right that we got it. I think where the disappointment comes in is it's actually been much the same and to be honest, a little bit less than what we saw in those big years at the Bulldogs. He's slotted back in to be, around a 105 guy across those 2 seasons. But as you flag, what makes him so good is that role he plays. Big body mid, can take those smaller types as a tag, can take the bigger body types, can push forward and be an offensive threat and really just wear out those A-grade midfielders. And he does get the A-graders. That's the other thing. He doesn't just get a big body. He gets whoever the best is. That's Josh Dunkley. And just a crucial piece when you flag a Lockie Neal and an Ashcroft and all these different guys they've rolled through that Brisbane midfield. He's just such a key piece. And his role just gives him that assurity. We talk about guys that have versatility. And while Dunkley has that, at Brisbane, the best thing about him is he gets his 80% time on ground at a minimum. He gets his 80% CBAs. And you can near on bank on consistent scores every single week.
So true. That 107.4 average last year in fantasy came to us with 15 tons, 6 of them over 120. So there's your ability to turn them into captaincy scores. And it's pretty rare he drops a sub 80, not just in AFL Fantasy, but in SuperCoach as well. Last year in AFL Fantasy, top 10 for total points. We're talking 12th for average and a top 5 midfielder. So to be able to get 8th for points, 5th for mids by average, we're talking top of the line, absolute out-and-out superstar. Well, over in SuperCoach, an average of 111.8, 16 tons. The conversion of 100 to now ceiling scores to put a VC or C on is even better because 9 of them are over 120, including 4 scores over 140 and that season high score of 163. Again, not even a handful of scores under 80. It is rare territory that in his time at Brisbane, he drops that sub 80 score. 12th for total points, 7th for mids for points. And then when you look at it from an average perspective, he's top 10 mid in the league and he's top 15 overall in SuperCoach. So right at the top of the tree, across the midfield, right through there. And he's now doing it for multiple years at Brisbane and the Dogs. This is his overall season rank just in the last 3 years. 12th, 20th, 10th in SuperCoach. 8th, 22nd, and 6th in AFL Fantasy. So again, multiple years across multiple clubs, just finds a way, doesn't he? Despite there being this always sense of, I'm never quite happy with him, he never really disappoints us, does he?
No, and that's what makes him so interesting, MJ, is he's perennially been a top 8 mid. Now, when we say top 8, he might not be, as you flagged just said, in the 8, but he's so close to it that it doesn't really matter at all. And that's what makes him so fascinating. He hasn't had that uber season like we thought, or like we really got for 2019, even though the average doesn't reflect it. If you owned him that season, he was a captain option every single week and a difference maker, but he hasn't quite scaled those heights consistently. But the thing I love about him is he's always unique. He doesn't seem to get any attention. He's often a guy that he never goes badly enough that there's, oh my God, this is a bargain. But what he does do is he has these ebbs and flows like a lot of players do, but he always seems to course correct. So he has these averages of, 95 to 100 and you go, oh, Dunkley's a nice player. But when I'm upgrading my team, I don't really think about him. And then you look at the end of the season, he's averaging 107 and you realize in that back 10, 11, 12, whatever games, he's gone at 112 or 115 or in SuperCoach upwards of 120 and you feel like, damn, looking back, that was the guy I should have had because he just finds a way to get there. And I think that's where he becomes so fascinating for 2025. For me, you can't start him because of that early buy and there's just not enough value at his current price. Could the ebb and flow at the start of the season be a hot run of form where he comes out the gate averaging 115, 120? Absolutely. But it just feels like at that start of the season, knowing there's an early buy, you're factoring him in for an upgrade target. And I think obviously what comes with that is you have a look and see, right, MJ? He's probably an upgrade target realistically around 7, 8, 9 and beyond. And by then you'll know not only how your team's going, but how are the other mids going and where does Josh Dunkley fit in at that point of the season?
Yeah, and when you're talking about have a look at what he is, it's not this sense of we're forecasting a massive change in role, a massive change in market share, or any of these elements. It's the things that sit around Josh. It's, well, which of these value guys or the top end options from this buy round that structurally probably sit a little bit more critical to you? Are you considering? Are you looking?
But MJ
at
also
that?
as well, we do know that there's guys that have those stinker scores. Like someone might get injured, and when you're upgrading, you go, I love Dunkley, but there's this guy 50, 60K cheaper.
Yeah, that's right.
And get that output. And I feel like that happens to him a lot because he doesn't have these massive bottom scores where he gets really cheap. You just keep it moving. You find someone else. But I guess what we're encouraging people to do is if you see this guy averaging 95 through 11 games, your eyes should be lighting up because you know there's 110s and 115s coming for an extended period of time.
And there was a period of time last year for 2/3 of the year, he's popping 110, closer to 115 across the formats. In fact, I know middle part of the buy, coming out of the buys mid-year, people, if they've got an excess of cash wanting to splash it, they were looking at Josh because he was through that middle portion of the buys in the mid-year in AFL Fantasy, running over 110 in SuperCoach. He was north of 115, pushing 120. And then over the last 6 weeks, a little bit of a slow scoring patch. Now, Brisbane really got moving over the last 2 months of the year. It's safe to say there was times during the year where it's like, these guys aren't even going to make finals. And then just the last few months of the year, just absolutely found their groove. It clicked. In a similar season of time, Will Ashcroft comes back from injury. I'm not saying it's the causation for the slow scoring of Josh Dunkley, but over the last 6 home and away games of the year, he goes at an average just of 93 in AFL Fantasy and just of 101 in SuperCoach. Now, I think these are his basement territory scoring, but when you're paying a 110 price point, if not higher, on his head, closer to 120 in SuperCoach, closer to 115 in Fantasy, you can't have a guy dropping scores like that. So have you got a read on why you think for a 6-week stretch of times or for a couple of games in there especially, his scoring was really off? Is there anything that you can see that might give some narrative to why he's had such a poor run?
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
This episode is brought to you by Unstoppable. Discover the inspiring true story about Anthony Robles, who defied every expectation to become a national wrestling champion in Unstoppable, a new original movie from Amazon MGM Studios and director William Goldenberg, evoking the excitement and camaraderie of classic sports dramas and thrilling wrestling matches. Unstoppable features an all-star ensemble cast, including Jarrell Jerome, Jennifer Lopez, Don Cheadle, Michael Pena, and Bobby Cannavale. Watch Unstoppable now, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video.
Oh, I think for the MJ with that run, it's like any chunk of data, like picking those 6 games you pick. Obviously one of them includes when he had a really big job on Chad Warner in a really tight game against the Swans. So that's the 61. The other ones are in there from a fantasy perspective, 111, 84, 92, 83, 128. So as I just mentioned, you take the 61 out, it's 100. Yes, in the 6-week stretch, it's a 93. But then I look at the 4 games previous to that, it's a 130 across 4 games.
In fantasy,
so
yeah.
My point is that's what he is.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, the thing with him more than a lot of players is he has this monster ceiling. So that's why I'm saying your eyes should be lighting up. If this guy's averaging 90, the lower the better. If you see him averaging 90, you know there is an enormous run coming before the end of the season. Conversely, if he comes out of the gates going 130, I'm tentative going, there hasn't been a dramatic role change. There's not enough in my mind for him to have to do that at Brisbane. I feel like an incredible season would be a 112, 113 in fantasy, maybe a 120 we know in SuperCoach, sometimes you have those years where everything you touch turns to gold and you can get that nice differential between AF and SuperCoach. So for me, if you're building your team and obviously you've got a few spots to fill as the season goes on and you're upgrading, this is a guy. But conversely in AFL Fantasy, with the way the game's played now, and you've got these sideways moves that you can make in the back end, this is where I think as that game evolves and people start, mastering, I guess, the art of closing the season out, this is a guy you've got to be really keeping an eye on, because if he's in his little dip and there's a run of games where there's not maybe a guy of Chad Warner's ilk that you think he might have to do a job on, this is when he can turn it on and give you those 4 or 5 game stretches where you go, not only is this a captaincy option, but this is a difference maker. And I feel like these are guys that as we move through the years of having these additional trades and, having 23rd and 24th premiums and sideweighting premiums, these are the guys we're going to look for that have this monster ceiling, can go on these runs, because MJ, he does it all the time. Like, we're not just picking 1 4-game stretch. Like, there's others that are 125 stretches, 120 stretches. Like, it's just the scorer he is. So when I look at his splits, you take the good with the bad. It puts me off starting him with the early buy and how good he is. But as I said, when you're planning and you're looking for relevance, this is a guy that's perennially overlooked as an upgrade target. Yet, as you just read out, he's there. He's in the mix.
I find it really hard to disagree with you on finding a narrative and a reason to start Dunkley. I think when you stack up the reasons to try to get there, it feels really hard. Because when you are paying for a guy at the top where he is, you're needing them to, at minimum, hold that average for that first 6 weeks, if not outperform it. Now, can Dunkley do that? Absolutely he can. But how are you anticipating he get there? He's already got, outside of clear centre-bounce role and opportunity, you're going, right, it's got to be the fixtures, it's got to be the matchups. But as you look through some of those early games for Brisbane in the year, if he starts one of them slow, you're now slowing down. You throw in that early buy that sits there, where we're already looking at a Bailey Smith, a Callum Mills, a Matt Roberts, a Kadeem Coleman, a Tom Green, understandably so for others, presents value despite not being on the cheaper side. A backline that people are struggling to find upside might just default to a Lockie Whitfield and go, barring injury, he's going to be top 2 or 3. Stuff it. I'm just going to anchor it. It just starts to get really, really hard to justify getting into Dunkley, despite, could he average 130 over the first 6 weeks? Absolutely. But when you start to think about the risk profile of your team, how many other players from that buy you like, where you're wanting to get your pieces of value, it does start to stack and go, you know what, maybe I will upgrade. And if he starts slow, I know a run is coming. And if he fires, okay, I might just have to keep my powder dry a little bit.
Well, the funny thing, MJ, too, is if he pops a 130 in opening round, you're not getting that score and you know you've missed it. But conversely, if he drops a 70, there's no way you're starting him because you know the price drop is coming. So for me, that's where I can't rationalize what would have to happen for me to start him, because poor score, you're not starting him because of the cash generation that he'd lose.
Yeah.
Or the reduction in cash. But conversely, if he drops a 130, you're going, damn, like that's a score I've missed. Because that's what he is. We've just gone through it all. He's a roller coaster of runs, and it's really 2 or 3 bad games that define a bad stretch, and it's 2 or 3 monster scores across the season that define a good stretch. So for me, that's where I go, get through the early buys, let the dust settle in your team, pick off the guys that you really need to have that present 20, 30, 40 points of value. And the good thing is, he's got the last buy. So that can get you through the other buys. And then you might be in this luxurious position where you can move him off if he's not doing what you want, or you see someone else that's value. So that's where for me I go, get through the start, let the dust settle, round 7, 8 and beyond. If you're looking for an upgrade in a mid and he's at the right price and you like the run and all those things, super, super relevant, especially because point of difference. And often he's just a coach that's overlooked. It's not like you get one score out of him and then everyone jumps on. Like, people just don't jump on. Yeah. That's what's so crazy, MJ. They just find a reason to not jump on. And yet again, every year we have the same conversation about Josh Dunkley is a top 8 mid again, or close enough that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's true. Now, there was that quiet 6 weeks to end the year. Does it correlate to a Will Ashcroft? Does the emergence of the Norm Smith medalist hurt the scoring of a Josh Dunkley? Look, from a role perspective, and we talked about this with, I think it was with Mini Monk when we talked about the Lockie Neal in the episode of the 50 Most Relevant, which is for a premium mid to have certainty of 80% centre bounce attendance and 80% time on ground. Those are two of the core ingredients for a player that is an inside midfielder that does have outside skill to just give them all the territory they need to push that top end premium scoring. Is there a world where the arrival and the development of a Will Ashcroft or the landing of his brother Levi at the club, does that push Dunkley out 5 to 10% of centre bounces? Politely, no. Neal is their extractor. He is their in and under guy. Dunkley is the big body, the defender, and the contested Hulk. If anyone is sliding out of this Lion side, if it's anyone, it's McCluggage from centre bounce, and it's Will Ashcroft spending a little bit more time on the inside. I just don't believe a world or see a world where their best defensive-minded midfielder goes out for another offensive-minded. Now, Will's got presence to defend. I'm not saying he doesn't do that. But Josh Dunkley is one of the best defensive big body mids in the comp. Will is not going to hurt Josh, nor is he going to hurt Lockie. He's going to take the share of opportunity from a Hugh, who's more likely to then come into a fourth and fifth option and be across the wing, not the third option like he was this year. So I'm not concerned about Will Ashcroft hurting the scoring or hurting the market share of Josh Dunkley. I just don't see it. But draft is an interesting space, Kane. And at the coaches panel, we choose to draft on the Keeper platform in 2025. His average has him as an M1 across the formats, but I just don't see anybody taking the leap in the first round. So he feels like he's the kind of guy that by average and by points should be gone in the second. But positional scarcity could seem him drift and become available in the third, which, given his pedigree, despite we've talked about these peaks and troughs of the year, his season overarching pedigree is unmatched in many, many areas. To get him in the third could be crazy, but that's exactly the world where I could see it landing on draft day.
MJ, 100% agree. I think he's a third round pick. I think you won't have to be forced into taking him in the second. I think you're going to be able to get him in the third quite comfortably, because I think what often happens is there's mids that are averaging below him that people will like more. And I think you can just let him slide. And again, if he goes early, no dramas, you might feel like there is mids that can jump in from the price below. But for me, he's always a consistent performer, not only in his scoring, like we mentioned, but he's super durable. We don't feel like there's anything that's massive risk. So for me, third round, happy days. Would not even be shocked, MJ, if he's in the fourth. Because when you think about the fourth, let's take 31, 32, 33. Like, that's not an outrageous number with positional scarcity of a couple forwards really jumping up from, a total points value that are below him. You could get very lucky if you're, at the back end of the third, fourth turn. He might be there if you're pick 30, 31. So for me, if you get that, you're off to the races. You can start taking risks elsewhere. But yeah, MJ, I'd be fascinated when we get to the pointy end and when we hit March, where is he going? I feel like he's a lot more likely to be going closer to the fourth than he is closer to the second.
Yeah, it's a fair shout. Hey, mate, as always, a pleasure talking with you about one of your favourite players in the fantasy footy landscape. We will definitely have you back on yet again another episode of the 50 Most Relevant before we're done in 2025.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you.
If you want to go check out any of the other players we've revealed so far through the 50 Most Relevant, maybe not the Nick Newman one, just quietly, you could go back wherever you're checking out this episode. It is available, every single player, every single discussion that we've had. If you're watching this as an episode on YouTube, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, why don't you do that? If you like the video yet, it takes you 2 seconds to do so. And comment below. Let me know if you are watching this on YouTube, what you think he's going to average in 2025. The audio podcasts are there. Give it a 5-star rating. And if you give us a nice little Apple review, we'll read it out at the end of one of these episodes of the 50 Most Relevant and give you a little bit of a shout out too. In the description of this episode is all the details. We can get in touch with us across social media. join our Patreon. There's some new things coming over the next couple of weeks. If you want to become a Patreon, you'll get early and first access to that, as well as where you can get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. You'll order it now. It'll be guaranteed to have landed before the season starts in 2025. You want a clue for who's next? We're getting dangerously, scarily close to the halfway part of the 50 most relevant. This year's series just feels like it is flying by. So here's a clue. The preseason word for 2025 is upside. Has this player got upside? Has this player got upside? I've got to get some inbuilt value and got to get some upside with every spot I start in my squad. And while I don't disagree with that sentiment, sometimes in a line, getting what you pay for is not only enough, but is a necessary, valid, and maybe even the right approach. The player that we're talking about on the 50 most relevant tomorrow has been a premium for multiple years in his life. And he's probably just going to do it again in 2025. But when it comes to referencing his name and could you start him, it's no upside. I'll just get him as an upgrade. But if he keeps doing it again and again and again, you're probably going to get him the same price to start. So why not just start with him instead of upgrading around a guy who's clearly been top of his line, right near that top end for the last couple of years? Who's this guy that there might not be much value, but he's as reliable as it comes in this line? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.